Right. Just giving it a few seconds to make sure this is kicking in on the feeds, guys. But hi, how you all doing? Hope you're all doing well. Craig Turner here from Revival Retro Events, and it's been a while. I hope you all had a decent year as possible, and I just wanted to come on today and give you a bit of an update on what's going on with Revival Retro Events. Obviously, it's been nearly a full year now since we did our last event with you. It's probably the last event any of you went to. How's it going, Woody? Thanks for logging on, mate. And thanks for reminding me that the chat is working. Bear with me, I'll address your questions shortly, guys. I've got you on the feed here, so feel free to say hello and ask any questions. But I'm just going to go into a little bit about where we're at and let you know what our plans are for 2021 and beyond. So, as some of you may know, Revival Retro Events is made up of a very small team of volunteers and enthusiasts, and obviously we've all been kind of struck. Everybody who's into their retro games, into their gaming in general, the scene this year has been decimated by the COVID pandemic, and unfortunately, it's resulted in quite a bit of loss of life, loss of earnings, loss of incomes, loss of jobs, all kinds of bad news all around. And I know a lot of people have been itching to kind of, for some semblance of normality to return. And regardless of however you think this COVID's been dealt with by the government, the way the pandemic's been handled, it's been a massive battle for everybody worldwide, and it's been a personal struggle for a lot of people out there. And of course, without going too much into all that side of it, on the events front, obviously, it's meant that the entire scene has pretty much died as much as you know it. A lot of you out there love to socialise at events. A lot of you out there love to go to events and buy stuff, see friends, do a lot of gaming and things like that. And unfortunately, we've just not been able to do that. We've not been able to get together around each other's houses and have a game. The best most of us have been able to do is do a bit of gaming online, which isn't ideal, and it's not as sociable as they'd like to pretend it is. And so, obviously, now things have kind of cracked on. The last revival now was last March. I fell ill just before it and unfortunately missed it. But we did a much smaller revival last year because it was a year we were intending to take a little bit of time off and kind of regroup. And as it turns out that everybody had to do that in the end, and unfortunately, it meant a lot of you have had to miss out in the meantime. For people like myself, the events are a big way of socialising with my friends up and down the country, and seeing what's going on, new in retro gaming and in people's lives, and seeing what everybody's been up to. And we've just not been able to do that. Now, our intention was to do two small events last year, as everybody knows. We intended to do For the Gamers Part 1, which was a free event last March. As it turned out, it was a massive success. And then we intended to do a Part 2 last November. Obviously, the way things panned out, that just couldn't happen. And I last came to you, I believe it was September, I think, or maybe end of August. And I told you where we would stand as with regards to the events once we knew a little bit more. Now, I had my predictions for the way I thought the pandemic was going to play out, which mostly were correct. I said when we originally cancelled, well, when we were going to cancel November, I said I would give it till the end of the summer because I had a feeling it was going to play out until Christmas. As it happened, when I came on last September and told you about it, the guidance that was in place then, basically it was one of the last things to be considered in government guidelines, and they were basically discouraging it in all forms. So even if the lockdowns and that hadn't come in the form they had, it'd been very unlikely we would have been able to hold our event in November in any kind of shape that you would have been able to recognise. So it's probably for the best that it didn't actually happen, and thankfully everybody stayed home, stayed safe, and it gave us a little time to go away and rethink things. Since then, the team have kind of got their heads together and we've been thinking about exactly the way we wanted to go forward with Revival. We promised you that we would be back. We have the advantageous position in that being a not for profit event, we can come back anytime and we can host an event because there's no money riding on it. But of course, we do have to be careful to watch our budget and ensure that we do things that basically we can afford to do without running any kind of personal financial risk. And that's basically the position that's, the decision that's driven our position from that point forward. Now, the team have gotten their heads together. We did hint at the fact we may do a virtual event. That was one of the things we talked about just before Christmas. And but once we started getting our heads together, it sounded good on paper, but when I started looking at the practicalities of doing what I wanted to do, it may not quite have turned out the way I wanted to. It may be something we can consider in future, but it's not really where I wanted to go. And as it turned out, the increase in COVID contraction rates over Christmas, the second, like third lockdown we're now in, it was just too much. There was too much going on in people's lives. People were watching their livelihoods. People had a lot of family things to deal with. We unfortunately had some unfortunate circumstances go on around family members contracting COVID ourselves, and I'm sure many of you out there at this point have been touched by the disease, unfortunately, and that was just a lot to deal with emotionally, and up here, you've got to be looking after your mental health, and then you've got to be looking after your family priorities and all that. So the virtual event just isn't going to happen. We couldn't do that because we just wouldn't have been able to commit our heads to it enough to make it successful. So we just scrapped that idea. Now, I did say last September that I would wait and I would intentionally hold back. A lot of other event organisers were starting to talk about going right back into events as soon as they could. I said back then that we would take as long as was needed to even start thinking about things. And I did say back then that I anticipated this would take up most of the financial year, whatever happened. I predicted it was going to bang on until about Easter, and look where we stand. Just last week we get our announcements from, was it last week or was it earlier this week, from Boris Johnson. Obviously, we've now got a roadmap back to normality as far as interacting in society goes, and I needed that information to be able to start to think about where we go. That's not to say it's the only deciding factor, but it has kind of influenced my train of thought. And you'll know that the Revival team have been doing some virtual meetups online to discuss where we want to go and what we think might be good ideas to move forward. And even though we said we're not going to rush anything, we just want to remind everybody that we're still here, that we're still about, and that we are planning something behind the scenes. So you're probably wondering exactly what that is. I know I've waffled on for a few minutes there. Basically, we don't think the time is right. We don't think that it would be. I don't think it would be the best decision right now to plan an all-out event. The reason for that being, I did talk last September about some of the restrictions that had been put in place by the government. Whilst the tier system was going on and we weren't in full lockdown, there were a lot of conditions imposed based on the last regulations they announced for public events, conferences, and such things. And so I've kind of got to work off what was decided then. People seem to have got very excited at the fact that we've now got this plan. He's basically said he's not going to, hurry things up. Certainly not going to hurry things up. The dates that have been announced for the staggered unlocking of society again are pretty much the best case scenario. And that means that even though we've been given dates of first week of March, second week of April, and then end of June for things getting back to normality, you've got to bear in mind that is assuming there's going to be no bounce backs in terms of infection rates and things like that. It's also going to depend hugely on people getting their vaccinations, and people certainly having their first vaccination and hopefully a lot of people, the early people, getting their second vaccinations. And if people aren't doing that, and people aren't, staying safe and staying home, and people are rushing back out to shops and rushing back out to pubs and not giving it a second thought, then we're not going to be in a situation that by the end of June we're going to be able to go back to anything. As far as events go, when it comes to the events, last year the considerations the government made and the guidance they gave, events were the very last thing on their cards. Now, although for the first time ever, Boris Johnson actually mentioned concerts and outdoor events and things like to that effect in his speech. Those things will be the last things to have legislation laid out for them. Last year, it took until the end of July for legislation to come out, which is why I delayed my announcement about November. And they never even put that legislation into effect because the second lockdown happened, and they just basically went with the way they were at the start, which was forget about events altogether. The legislation's starting to be unveiled for everybody else right now with regarding shops and places like Arcade Club. Some of the places you're going to want to visit and support. I'm sure a lot of you out there are planning trips. I know some of the guys in our circles have been talking about doing that. We really want to do it ourselves. But even that, we've got to be really careful to do it. And I would encourage anybody to get your vaccinations done before you start thinking about going anywhere. Whether you get it or not, you're going to be spreading it about, and people don't realise the rates they're doing it. And so the way I'm looking at events is this: even if the best case scenario happens, and on 21st of June or something like that, they say, right, pubs are open again. You can go and meet friends in limited capacity. The rollout's going to be continue to be slow. Social distancing measures, they've said, are going to be in place for a very, very long time. And a lot of us have kind of got the consensus between us that this is going to be something that's going to be pretty hard on society right up until Christmas again this year. And so you've got to box clever when it comes to doing things like events. You think like society is here, the eventing thing is all the way down the road. It's something that it's going to be one of the last considerations for guidance. And as far as risk goes, it's one of the highest risk things you can do. And even though we have the luxury, like I say, we're not doing it for profit, we've still got to be very careful about what we plan. If we plan something right now that we end up having to go down the road and cancel, it's going to suck. If we plan something now that where massive restrictions are imposed, it's going to suck. Now, based on what we know, the conditions that were put in place, that were intended to be put in place into the legislation, and ended up actually being partly applied in the tier system of this. Indoor events are going to be massively restricted. In the highest tier areas where there were outbreaks, all public events were to be, stopped as it was. Even in the lowest tier, like the lowest risk areas, the restrictions that were in place were too restrictive to enable us to have a proper event. It would have been the things I talked about last September. So first of all, you've got to talk about capacity. Only certain venues will be granted permission to open. And when you're talking about event spaces, you're talking about obviously the larger spaces. Even the ones that would be allowed to open, there was a limit imposed, and that limit, nobody really realised the figures. The limit imposed was a maximum of either 1,000 people if the capacity was obviously in the several thousands, the official capacity of a place, or half of what the quoted capacity of the space is. So if, for example, we hired a room where the maximum listed capacity was 1,000 people, the maximum we'd be allowed under any conditions for any conference, event or exhibition would be 500 people. Now, when you're looking at those kind of numbers and you start looking at the big event spaces like the NEC or some of the big convention centres, even if you've got a space that can hold 8,000 people, The maximum you would be allowed under any circumstances would be 1,000 people. Now, those kind of numbers, anybody who's ever run the numbers on these kind of things will tell you that you could probably not make an event work. You couldn't probably even break even at trying to do an event for 1,000 people in a space that holds many thousand more. The costs involved in renting the place alone would bust you. Not only that, but when it comes to exhibitions and expos and conventions like we do, um, obviously a great amount of the money that is made, that is raised towards holding it, comes from traders. That brings me on to the second restriction. The second restriction clearly stated that booths would have to be pre-booked. Anything that you visit would have to be pre-booked for you to attend and interact with. I think they were thinking mainly of conferences and trade events rather than exhibitions when it comes to things like that. But the same rules applied. They would want to do data logging of everybody who comes in and out the door, everybody who interacts there. There'd have to be advanced cleaning measures in place. Interactive exhibits you would have to book time slots for, and the limits on numbers and the amount of floor space you have to leave between traders and exhibits and things like that it was set at something like 6 foot. Now, if you think about doing a large scale event, that may be feasible, but then you've got to worry about the cost issue because you can't get enough people in. When it comes to doing a small event, it basically leaves, if you think about the format of events that we've done in the past, where we closely mix the traders and the exhibitors to kind of get a nice flow going and make sure that everybody visits everything as they come in, and socialises between everything, you realise that that just isn't possible with those kind of restrictions. Now, I highly expect the legislation to be amended and will probably start to come out the closer we get to June. When that legislation does come out, there's nothing at the moment, bear in mind. When that legislation does come out, I fully expect it to be under the same conditions, which means that events will be the last thing considered. They will probably set a future date when they do it. When they announced it in July last year, they said that those conditions would only come in the middle of October if everything was going all right. If they do the same kind of thing again, they will want to be playing it safe, so they'll probably leave it even longer to allow people to host conferences and events. And so I expect they will do something similar where they will say, you know, you can start doing events again from the start of autumn, but you're going to have this, 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 and this. You're going to have to jump through a lot of hoops. And like I say, a lot of it will depend on how many people are getting vaccinated. A lot of it will depend on the transmission rates. A lot of it will depend on bounce back. There could even be economical things you've got to think about. A lot of people will be out of work. They may not be able to afford to go to events. There may be travel restrictions, which stops people going up and down the country. There's also that to be considered. There's just a lot of variables that make me extremely wary about doing an event. So basically, what we've decided is doing an event as you know it this year is pretty much off the table when it comes to us. I don't care what other events do. I would highly discourage anybody from doing anything that jeopardises public health and safety in that kind of way. And regardless of the risk involved, that's up to them. But as far as, you know, keeping patrons safe goes, I know a lot of you out there now a lot like to think, well, we're getting vaccinations, it's all going to be okay, let's just kind of ease it off. That's fine if you want to be like that, but I've got to consider myself. I'm on the high risk list. I've got family members on the high risk list, and every single member of our team, they're all volunteers. There's no reason they should voluntarily risk their own health and well-being for the sake of everybody else. I hope you can understand that. And so we've taken the decision that a proper event is not going to happen this year. We just cannot do it. It's not worth the risk. It's not worth the risk to any of you. And in the long run, you'll thank us. You really will thank us for doing that. There may be other events you go to, but I personally wouldn't want to risk myself for anybody else. And I think it's irresponsible of anyone to entertain the notion of an event for the next few months. It is just not on the cards for us. So you're probably wondering then exactly what um, my announcement was. Well, my pseudo announcement was the other day. I threw up a banner on my wall and on the revival wall, just showing coming soon revival Zombeer Apocalypse. Well, there's a little bit of a play on everybody's reactions, to be honest, because the second everybody talked about Boris Johnson's announcement, and they talked about pubs being back open from 21st of June, everybody went absolutely ape, and they just said, "Well, I can't wait to get back in a pub. I can't wait to go and have a drink. I can't wait to go back out there." And I know that everybody is going to be chomping at the bit when it comes to wanting to get back to events. And I don't blame you. We all want to do it. I miss a lot of people out there. All of the team miss the socialising. Um, the team has spoken online, but we only started doing video chats recently, and we realised action again. I'm a homebody, and yet I still felt like I really needed that interaction. Um, and sorry if the video freezes occasionally, guys. It's probably just my Wi-Fi playing up. But we've sorely missed interacting properly with people, and all the guys we only get to see at events. We really miss you guys as well. So where we're at is we're thinking we would like to come back and we would like to do something revival branded, and we want to give people something to look forward to. So the banner that I put up was more of a thing to say, listen, we've not gone anywhere, we're coming back, we are formulating plans behind the scenes, but we're running a few different ideas. Now, the biggest idea that we've kind of put our heads together on is, even though the restrictions around an event will be highly limited, um, the conferences and conventions and the like, when it comes to actually having a gathering, there will be different restrictions in place for parties, weddings, and other get-togethers of the like. And so the way we're thinking right now is we are thinking of doing, it will be much later, might be towards Christmas or just after. We are thinking of the idea of doing a big revival social, right? When I say a social, what we're thinking is we're maybe going to do maybe an invite only thing, because it will be a party rather than a public event. It will be pre-booked only to ensure we're staying in line with current legislation on tracking people and things like that. We will be encouraging people to get their vaccinations before they attend anything, and even though we can't legally enforce that, we would openly encourage people to do that if you're going to come along. It would be better for everybody if you did, and we will certainly be having to get ourselves checked before we do anything like that. What we're looking to do is probably we're either going to hire a working men's space, or maybe an established venue that already exists and needs the business and is already open and already has certain facilities in place, that will hold maybe a couple of hundred people, and will basically have some gaming already on site, or able for us to bring a little bit of gaming in for just general use, but it won't be in your typical event format. We're thinking about having maybe one or two local traders come in just for something to, for you to browse around and maybe buy. It won't be a full weekend. We're thinking about doing a single day, maybe a midday till midnight kind of thing, and it will just be a big revival mixer. We'll probably throw up maybe competitions on stage where you can come up and win beer tokens. You know what I mean? We won't have loads of exhibits there, but we'll probably move in a couple of our arcades, for example, and we'll have the thing on stage, and everybody to just come along and have a little bit of a game, but basically just come and interact and have a bit of a party. We'll chuck a bit of music on, you know what I mean? We'll have the bar going. We'll try and put some food on of some description, and we'll just make it a big revival mixer. The core, the core amount of people who come to our events are people who come for the social aspect, right? And so everybody just wants to get together and have a drink together and have a chat and have a catch up. There's going to be plenty of time to do the big event thing. It's just a very big risk at the moment. And the biggest thing that most of you look forward to with these events is catching up with people. So I say, let's do that. You know what I mean? That would be the best way to go. That way, there's not a massive amount of risk or work or anything involved in it, but there's a chance to get people together and just have a bit of a mixer and have a bit of a catch up, and it's kind of a precursor to going back to the event land, if you know what I mean. It means that some people who unfortunately may have, struggled with their jobs and employment haven't got to fork out a load of money to do it. You're not going to have to book, multiple hotels. We haven't got to mobilise a load of people to organise something that may only have a few people turn up to. Um, it's just a good way of getting everybody back together and being revival. One of our things with RRE is that we don't want every event to be the same. We don't have a fixed event that we do every year. We want to do something a bit different each time and bring people together. That's always been the aim of revival, and so I don't think it'd be out of the way for us to do something a little bit different like this, that we can stick our branding on, that everybody knows they can trust us, they trust what we do, they know it'll be a good time and just an excuse for everybody to get together. And I think that could be the best way to go. Um, everybody is going to be everybody's going to be, a bit wary of going back to full scale events. Everybody's going to be a bit wary about getting together en masse, and I just don't think it's the time to do it. I don't care what other people are doing. That is the way, that is our position, and we want to stick to it. But we just want to give people something to look forward to. And this is going to happen in some form or another. I can't tell you about dates, I can't even tell you about venues or anything like that. But those are the ideas we're currently throwing about. What I'm likely going to be doing is I'm probably going to put up some kind of poll on the revival page, on my personal page, asking for ideas, talking about what you might want to see. We could do our first fully trader focused event, because a trader focused event, we haven't got to worry about exhibit space. We could just do stalls fully spaced out somewhere, where people just come in for a few minutes and then go. It lowers the risk. It gets the traders back out there and selling again. There's a lot of different things we could do. There's a lot of ways we could work it, but we really want to do some kind of social. That's what Revival's always been about, and that's what I want our comeback to be about. So, yeah, so there's not going to be any dates for any time like very soon, guys. We can't even start looking at plans until we get latest legislation, and I can't see that coming until end of summer, to be quite honest. But I just wanted to give some people something nice to think about. Now we've finally been given some kind of plan and some dates by, by the government as to where they think we're going to go. Because we just remind you that we're back and that we've not gone away. We never went anywhere, and now everybody's kind of getting excited and that wants things to look forward to. By all means, do that. You just got to play it safe, and you've got to be realistic about these things. We all thought it'd be something that lasted a couple of months last year, and we never hear about it again. It's now pretty evident that COVID will never actually go away. We're all going to be able to have yearly jabs and things like that. They're talking about COVID passports for travelling and things like that. It's not going anywhere. So we've got to think about the long term here. And yeah, so I mean, some of the guys in the chat here, I'll just have a quick flick down the chat because I haven't actually had a chance to read much of it, and I'll see what some of you guys are saying, because I wasn't actually paying much attention while I was reading all that off. So I'm just going to pan back a little bit here. So some of them have scrolled off, but yeah, see, some people I can see here. I mean, Jason mentioned there, people are struggling job wise. It's not right to do something that people might not be able to get to because they're struggling for finances. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be fair to ask that of people, and it wouldn't be nice for them to have to miss something just for the people who've done all right during lockdown. You know what I mean? I can see a lot of you supporting each other. Sai says there, I wouldn't feel safe at a big event this year. I don't think any of us realistically would. So, you know what I mean? I'm certainly not one of those people who thinks that way. Matt from Play Leisure, if you can do anything to support the events, let us know. I do appreciate that, Matt. Thank you. We will definitely be leaning on some new support once we go back to events, because you think about during this lockdown, some of the startup arcades that have come around have unfortunately folded during these last 12 months. Some of the traders that we know and love unfortunately can't, won't be able to continue after this, and that, we don't know what the trader turnout's going to be at future events. So we're certainly going to put in the feelers out once again to look at new volunteers to help us and staff the events with us, help with the setups. We're going to be looking for new traders. We're going to be looking for new exhibitors, anybody who can help us on the arcade front and things like that. We know some people have already pledged to help us out on that front anyway, but we appreciate any suggestions and any offers from you guys. That retro video game, this is exactly the thoughts were going through my head. I'd rather a set of virtual events possible linked in with Amstream than do anything that could risk store. Yeah, exactly. The concept of a virtual event is something we still want to look at. We may do some snippets of something in the meantime, but it's like I say, it's going to depend on us, a lot of us going back to normality, ensuring that finances and family are looked after before we do any of that. Before we can commit our time to that. But yeah, there's certainly some possibilities on that front. Um, Rich says, I'm sceptical of whether things will actually be better in June or so. Other countries are being a lot more pragmatic about this. Yeah, certainly. There's definitely, yeah, watch out for the splashback. Let's be realistic, guys. Like I say, we thought this was going to be a short-term thing. We're now a year on, more than a year on from when it began, and we're still nowhere near the end of this. It's going to be something that's going to be with us for a long time, and it's readjusting to a society after that. You know what I mean? Bring a console party. Yeah, it's certainly one idea, Steve. I wouldn't like to depend too much on everybody who's coming to do that, but yeah, that's definitely an option. Keys in a bowl. Yeah, that's one option. Yeah. Don't let Dana in. I think Dana's run. Oh no, he's still here. I thought Dana had run off. I'd turn up for opening a packet of crisps at this point. Yeah, Jace, we're all chomping for it, mate. We really are. I would love to do the big event thing again. I would love to do the guests and a million arcades and pinball, and every single concert. My collection's gone through the roof during lockdown because I was able to actually take stock and balance my collection out and get some cool new things in that I want to share with people. We had some brilliant ideas for November. It just means we can carry them forward, but when it comes to logistics and things like that, getting everybody there that we want is going to be a nightmare because we just don't know how well, how much people are going to be willing to travel to things like this as well. You're well and good booking a guest who then comes down with COVID or comes down with COVID as a result of being at our event. It wouldn't be very, very good for our reputation, would it? So, yeah, so it's just one of those things, we've just got to box clever, and I don't see any need to be rushing out there. We're not in competition with anybody, so I don't see any need to be rushing out there and host an event just to be first back on the block. There's no point. We could do that, have a crap event, and never hold an event again. And that'd suck. Nobody wants that. Let's just bide our time. Let's just do something a bit more sensible. Let's ease ourselves back into it. And to be honest, last year, part of my feeling with regard to retro gaming, which is what we're all about, was that I wanted to gear it back more towards the community and the social aspect of it. Because as time goes on and the generations change, our demographic shrinks. It does shrink a little bit at a time. Some people lose interest, some people move on to other things. And I'm just trying to look after the people who've always supported us. We like to attract new people in, certainly, but when it comes to making ends meet, we know that we've got to look after the people who've looked after us, and we're doing that by not holding an event. We can leave it a little bit longer, we can regather ourselves, and we can decide if going back to large events, doing dedicated retro gaming, can actually be a thing, or whether we have to continue doing slightly smaller events and just making more of those, if you know what I mean. We'll have to see how things play out. this pandemic came out of nowhere. Nobody could have predicted exactly how it was going to pan out or where we'd be, 12 months after the worst of it hit. And well, as you can now see, we're here, and now we've got to start making adjustments for that. I don't think there's many deniers left out there now, but the ones that are, they're a bit stupid at this point to be denying how big the impact of this is. RRE camping and barbecue. You know what, Jason? We actually talked about the possibility of doing some kind of open air gaming thing, but this being, the UK, you know what our weather patterns are like. It'd be just our luck to do something that'll be washed out. But there are, yeah, that's definitely an avenue we've looked at, and may still be feasible in the future. But yeah, the kind of camping and barbecue thing, we had some ideas for that. Maybe we can put those into motion if the restrictions on indoor events are too tight. Maybe we can do something like that. The world is our oyster. We can do whatever we want to. We're not tied in to any kind of bookings anywhere. We're not tied in on sponsorship. We want to do something like that. We can do that. So, the more suggestions you guys can put forward, the more we know what you want to see and what you really want to go out and enjoy. We'll be doing, I'll probably be running a series of polls, in fact, which will gauge better where our audience is at right now, you know what I mean? And that will probably be the determining factor in exactly what we do next. The fairs. Yeah, there's definitely options like that, Pete. How's it going, Wayne? Local event for local people, we will have no trouble. Yeah, we can certainly do a local thing, Si, but I would like to still pull everyone together if we can. I mean, we'd said that we're going to branch out with Revival. We talked about doing events elsewhere in the country. We may still do that. But we need to gauge. It's easy for me to sit here and say everybody feels that way. I don't really know until we speak to people. People's opinions change every day. The way people are feeling about this whole pandemic changes every day. And so we've got to get a feel for how everyone is now, and we will have to continue to do it during this unlockdown process, if you know what I mean. How's it going, Kev? Retro goes to Glastonbury. How's it going, Benny? Yeah, I wouldn't do any decision that would be bad for anybody, Jason. That's the bottom line here. So let's just summarise then, because I've gone on for like half an hour now. Revival is coming back. We will be back in some form. We cannot guarantee anything until the next few months play out. We get some official guidance from the government, and we know for sure what we are and what we aren't going to be allowed to do. Um, any kind of idea about doing a proper revival event the rest of this year is off the table. It's just not feasible. We can't do it. I don't think the government's going to allow us to do it, and the practicality of doing that kind of event this year, um, I just don't think it's in our remit to do. Instead, we would like to try and plan a revival social gaming mixer of some kind that we probably will be allowed to do under legislation. Will cover most of our fans out there and most of our main followers who come to our events regular. We will do something where we can all get together, have a bit of a game, have a bit of a drink, and just enjoy ourselves. For some of us who never get to do all that at the events because we're too busy working hard, that'll be a refreshing change as well. Some people might have changed their minds about doing the events then. Our team has certainly shrunk, so maybe we can get some new recruits on the back of that. But going forward, Revival will be back. I'm looking at the moment, into 2022. It's going to be sometime in 2022 before we do anything even remotely like what we used to do. But yeah, Revival Zombeer Apocalypse is an idea we've got, but I need to lean on you guys for you to tell me if you think it's a good idea. Tell us what you want. Tell us what you'd like to see. Tell us how you feel about doing events and going back to events, and what you think we should do, and we will base it entirely on that. We'll see where we go from there. Yeah, Revival Zombeer Apocalypse will probably be our first thing back, and it will just be a social mixer. but it's not going to be for a little while yet, guys. I just wanted to give you a notion of where our heads are at, and to let you know that as soon as we possibly can, we want to do it, but we're just not going to jump the gun and put anybody at risk. So that's where we're at. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. It's been nice talking to you all, briefly as it was. And put your ideas down. We're going to throw some polls out. Make sure you vote on the polls and tell us what you want to see, and we will see where we go from there. But for now, guys, stay safe. As soon as you're able to, please go and get your COVID jabs. It's the best thing you can do to keep yourself and your family safe. It's the best thing you can do for helping society get back to normal. Make sure you're looking after your affairs, your finances, your family, and just stay safe, and just lean on us, guys. We've got this in hand. We're definitely talking about it. We're not going away, and we're all going to be looking forward to having a get together sometime in the near future. But in the meantime, make sure you support the places that are opening back up. Places like Arcade Club, Retro Dome, a lot of the startup arcades that have survived this pandemic. Make sure as soon as you're able to that you go there safely, and you enjoy those, and you give them your patronage, because if you can keep those places open, it kind of keeps the scene alive and maintains support for when we want to go back and start doing events that where we rely on those guys for some of our exhibits and some of their support. So make sure you support those, and we'll see you in the very near future, guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will speak to you all very soon.